everyone. I'm Melissa Pugh with Mythinformation Milwaukee. I'm here with Dan Barker from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I'm just going to ask you a couple questions, Dan, if that's okay.
Sure.
What do you think is the most important thing that the Freedom from Religion Foundation does?
The most important thing is to keep religion and government separate. And we have 5 full-time attorneys plus 2 full-time legal fellows, so there's 7 attorneys working, sending out letters and filing lawsuits to make sure that the government stays free from religion. That's what our group is called. So that's, I think, the most important. And we're on the map, and we're the group that complains the most. We have more legal cases and legal victories over many decades, and a good track record. And we win most of our cases, and the ones that we lose, we usually lose them not on the merits, but on standing. The court says, you didn't have the right to take this case. So anyway, so that I think that's important to make sure. And in fact, we're often joined by religious people in our lawsuits, Catholics and Protestants and Jews and Unitarians and Wiccans and whatever. They'll join us because they also agree that it's important to keep religion and government separate.
Yes. Great answer. What do you think is the possibility of us getting In God We Trust taken off of the currency and off of police squad cars?
I think the probability is low off the currency. Police cars, it's a little higher, but the problem with In God We Trust is that in the 1950s it was made our national motto. And so they can argue, hey, we're not pushing religion, we're just pushing the national motto. Well, that shouldn't be there. So there have been a number of attempts. A guy way back in California tried it back in the 70s. Madeleine Marie O'Hare tried it in the, I forget, 80s maybe. We tried it in the 90s, and each time the court said that we can't sue over In God We Trust. And can you guess why they would say that?
Why?
The judge said in all three cases that In God We Trust is not a religious phrase.
How is it not?
Well, that's what they said.
Wow.
They said you can't sue under state-church separation of religion and government because this is not a religious phrase. It's just a solemnizing kind of ceremonial deism that doesn't really mean God. But we surveyed Americans, and most Americans overwhelmingly think it is a religious phrase. Mm-hmm. And anytime we make a complaint about, a prayer at City Council or a Ten Commandments monument, invariably they'll pull out a dollar bill and say, why can't we pray? We have God on our money. So they see it as a religious phrase, although the courts are ducking the issue by saying, well, it's not religious. So yes. Michael Newdow's trying it, and we're ready to go back in again. But I think strategically, we need to wait for a more friendly Supreme Court before we try it again.
Hopefully in the next couple of years.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about your new building in Madison?
So yeah, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, it started in the mid-'70s. In 1990, we bought a building on a really nice corner, 2 blocks from the state capitol in Madison, Wisconsin. Very visible, right down there in the Capital District. And a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we raised money to expand it because we were so crowded. It was a nice 2-story old Italian 1855 home, and it was just way too cramped. And so we quadrupled the space. We bought the property next door and went up 5 floors over there. And so now we have room. Mm-hmm. We have room to have conferences, and we have a radio and television studio in there now. And we have an auditorium. We have an entire second floor legal wing where we have not only the 7 attorneys, but the legal staff that's there, legal assistant, plus workstations for interns. And sometimes there's 5 legal interns in there. So sometimes during the legal meetings, there's like 15 people in the legal. It was pretty neat, and there's room for them all to have their own offices. Before that, Andrew, one of our attorneys, was just working on a little cramped desk, kind of like next to a seat in the living room. Kind of. It wasn't really an office. It was horrible. But now he's got his office, and they all have their space. And we have now at a trail wing. We just hired a director of communications and a graphic artist, full-time graphic. In fact, we're keeping them more busy than we thought with a graphic artist. And then the administrative staff have their whole area. So it's really nice. You should come visit. And I'll play the brand new Steinway piano that someone gave us for the building.
Ooh,
Really
wow, that's great. Just one more question. Would you sign my book?
Would I sign your book? Sure.
Yes,
You have a book?
it's downstairs. I'll
Okay.
I'll get it in just a little while. But I did buy a book with the one you wrote with Richard Dawkins.
Oh, the God one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So I will get it.
I put the word God in quotes. The God,
the God.
the God book. Right?
How was that? Writing a book with Richard Dawkins.
Well, it was pretty easy. He asked me to do it. Originally, it wasn't a book. He was working on a slide, and I'm going to tell that story later today.
Okay.
But it was just research that he wanted, and then he said, "You know what? This research would make a good book." So kind of like an accidental book happened, which
Nice.
took about 14 months and a lot of work. And then it was all email, and then he approved and he disapproved of some of it even. He said, no, you shouldn't put that in. That's reaching too much. We don't want to try too hard. You know what I mean? We don't want to just throw everything in, just,
Yeah.
So he suggested some cuts, and so that was a lot of fun.
Great.
Today, of course, with email and internet, you don't have to be in the same room.
No,
You can just,
or Skype or anything.
any of that stuff, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dan. I really
Melissa.
appreciate
It was a
it.
pleasure.
Nice to see you. And that was Dan Barker from the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Great.
I hope you've enjoyed the small break, had something to drink. After all I hear, it's pretty, you'll need a lot of, people get thirsty down in hell, so some of you may need more beer. So our next speaker is Dan Barker. Dan is the current co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. He is a contributor editor of Freethought Today and is involved with the foundation's state/church lawsuits. He regularly travels the country and the world giving lectures, performing concerts, and participating in debates with theists, often at college and university campuses. Dan's book, Losing Faith in Faith, certainly helped me years ago in my own deprogramming, back when I was a metaphorical Westworld prostitute. And his excellent deprogramming continues as he joins us to talk about his new book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. Please welcome Dan Barker.
I like playing the tango because the Catholic Church outlawed the tango. It was sinful, it was sensual. You should never dance the tango. So, what better music? Beware of dogma, it has a bite. Beware of dogma, it wants a fight. Beware of dogma, it will ignite a holy war by itself. Beware of dogma, it'll trap your mind, religious dogma, it'll make you blind. Beware of dogma, it's not designed to let you think for yourself. If we let it out in the universe, there will be no doubt everything is worse. Beware of dogma, don't let it loose, that unchained dogma. It'll reproduce, tie up your dogma. There's no excuse for ignorance anymore. Beware of dogma, don't let it loose, that unchained dogma. It'll reproduce, tie up your dogma. There's no excuse for ignorance anymore. Please, clean up after your dogma. can't win. You can't win with original sin. It doesn't even matter how intelligent or kind you may have been. You just can't win. It was all over before it began. You were doomed in the fall of man. You can't win. I was dead because before my life had begun. I was dead because of something my great-great-great-great-grandparents had done. That's no fun. Adam and Eve didn't do any wrong. They were set up all along. They couldn't win. I've been told I must believe on Jesus Christ to be saved. But first, I must admit that I am totally depraved. No way. Before you go pointing that finger of blame, just remember, Eve was framed. She couldn't win. Kind of God's who's so insecure that he needs to send me to hell. It's the kind of God who'd probably get a big kick out of damning all the Christians as well. You never could tell. It was all over before it began. I was doomed in the fall of man. But as a skeptic, I must insist Adam and Eve didn't really exist. And until the day that old myth is shattered, we cannot win. So whether Jesus existed or not, I used to believe that he was my best friend. When I was 4 years old, I had a little friend named Joshua. Whenever I was alone, he would come over to play. Cookies, cartoons, and punch. He liked all the same things that I liked. Cheerios and milk for lunch. Kitty cats, balloons, and kites. We were blood brothers, pals forever. As close as we could be. Nobody else could see him, but he was real to me. Sometimes when I was sad, I would send Joshua a letter. He never wrote me back, but he'd always come right over to play. I'd never been to his house, but I knew exactly where he lived. His daddy was oh so nice to let us have such fun every day. We were blood brothers, pals forever, as close as we could be. Nobody else could see him, but he was real to me. When I was 5 years old, I got very busy with schoolwork and many new friends to get to know. Joshua moved away. Sometimes I missed him so. We had had such great times together, but I know he had to go. It works out much better that way. We were blood brothers, pals forever. He was my very best friend. Nobody else could see him. I now know he was just pretend. Now that some years have passed, I can look back and smile at my childhood, at the times when it hurt to grow up, like when Joshua moved away. So many solutions for the meaning of life. So many religions. What confusion, what strife. They spread like a cancer. They rise and they fall. But I have an answer that does away with them all. I don't need Jesus to give me a smile. I don't need some holy book to make my life worthwhile. Just give me reason, fairness, and love, because true human happiness does not come from above. They preach me their sermons, though I'm doing just fine. Can't they live their own lives and let me live mine? They say I'm a sinner who's blind in both eyes. Oh, but I am a winner, and I can see through those lies. I don't need Jesus to give me a smile. I don't need some holy book to make my life worthwhile. Just give me reason, fairness, and love, because true human happiness does not come from above. 2 or 3 years ago, I got to write a song with the Broadway composer Charles Strauss. You know, Charles Strauss is in his 80s now. He's a lifelong atheist. He wrote Annie, the musical Annie. The sun will come up tomorrow. And he wrote Bye Bye Birdie and all those, Put on a Happy Face, all these great songs. He wrote the theme for those were the days, you know. He was just a great guy. And we met in Connecticut, and he said, I didn't know there was all these atheists and non-believers in the world. I need to have a song about that, you know. I told him that Richard Rogers was an atheist, an outspoken atheist, and that the Gershwins were non-believers, and Jerome Kern and Irving Berlin, all this music written by people who didn't believe in God. So he said, send me some lyrics and I'll set them to music. And I thought, whoa, this is a challenge. You don't just want to send any old words to somebody like that, you know. It took me about 6 months. I came up with a set of lyrics, and he said, this is good. I can work with it. I can write a song to these lyrics. But he said, do you mind if I do a little bit of editing? And I said, you're Charles Strauss. You're the famous Broadway composer. You can, you know, yeah, sure. So he threw out about 2/3 of my words. He just put them in the trash that I thought were great. You know, I thought, and he just said, now he pruned it down. The genius of being able to write like that, he pruned it down to this little song that begins with a little nod to another famous, irreverent, non-believing songwriter, Yip Harburg, the man who wrote Over the Rainbow and Paper Moon and all that. The multitudes mumble mythologies without end, but me, I have trouble with ologies that pretend to show what can't be shown, to know what can't be known. Lutherans have liturgies, Calvinists have creeds, Muslims have their minarets, Catholics have their beads, Methodists have methods, holy truth to ascertain, but poor little me, I only have a brain. Bishops transubstantiate, Shintos ring their bells, Transcendentalists meditate while Wiccans weave their spells. Hindus chant a mantra when they can't relieve the pain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. So fearful of the Netherland, believers band together. Unhappy with the weatherman, the Zunies wave a feather. They dance in circles to demand great spirits and some rain. But what do you do if you only have a brain? Quakers quake and Shakers shake, and Jews eat kosher food. Rastafarians wear their hair in pious gratitude. They all boast of miracles that no one can explain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. Fearful of the Netherland, believers band together. Unhappy with the weatherman, the Zunies wave a feather. They dance in circles to demand great spirits and some rain. But what do you do if you only have a brain? Quakers quake, Shakers shake, and Jews eat kosher food. Rastafarians wear their hair in pious gratitude. They all boast of miracles that no one can explain. But poor little me, I only have a brain. So that music was by Charles Strauss, and genius. He did things with the chords that you're not supposed to do with chords, but it worked, right? He broke all these rules. He did all this stuff that you're taught in music school to don't do it. And didn't it hang together? I never would have thought of doing something like that. So anyway, I could play forever. It's a piano. Maybe I'll do another song in a minute. But I'm going to talk about the book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. And it's an accidental book. Maybe I can stand up here a little bit. In early 2014, Richard Dawkins sent me an email, and he said he needed help making a keynote slide that he was preparing for his talks. He uses Keynote, and I use Mac, so we use Keynote, just like Protestants versus PowerPoint, you know. Because he said that there's one sentence in his writings that he's been more criticized for than anything else ever. And you've heard people say that the four horsemen, you know, the Dan Dennett and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins are these strident atheists. They're angry. They're just bashing. But if you read their books, you do see some passion. You do see some strong feeling in there and good argument. But it's not strident. If you read it, it's just kind of logical. And I think what happens is psychologically is that when someone says something that makes you angry, you tend to project your anger back on them and say, why are you so angry? I think that's what's happening. Because what the atheists are saying makes people upset, and they think we're all upset. Except there's one sentence in The God Delusion Richard Dawkins wrote that really is somewhat, I guess you might even say, strident. Did you bring your God Delusions with you today? Turn with me to chapter 2, verse 1. Chapter 2, verse 1 of The God Delusion is where Dawkins went after the God of the Old Testament. He said, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. People have said, well, what does this biologist know about the proper way to interpret the Bible? I mean, really, isn't that kind of over the top, you know? Shouldn't he just know his place? Although a lot of them think they know a lot about science, right? They're free to speak out about what they don't know. So the chief rabbi of England even accused Richard Dawkins of anti-Semitism for that sentence. But he later retracted that accusation when he realized he was talking about the character in the Bible. So I was thinking, that would make a good song, that sentence. And so I went online and I watched Richard say that. He said it 3 or 4 times in public. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, he said. And I listened to the tones of his voice. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. So without knowing it, he wrote a song, because those are the tones of his voice. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, and unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic racist, infanticidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Which one did I leave out? I left out one. Filicidal. The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. So it needs a verse, and it needs maybe a atheist backup choir. Are some of you singers? Wouldn't that be cool to have a big bum, 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 bum? So the idea was to have this PowerPoint keynote slide where Richard said he could defend himself against accusations that he didn't know what he was talking about, because really sadomasochistic, really, infanticidal, and all of those things. So he wanted to have this spider diagram where the middle of the frame would be the sentence, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. And then for those 19 nasty words, there would be like a spider leg. There'd be like 19 legs going out. And you could click up on this one up here that says ethnic cleanser, for example, and up would pop the verse. You shall drive out all the inhabitants from the land, for I have given you the land to possess. If that's not ethnic cleansing, I don't know what is. So we started collecting these verses, and pretty soon they got to be a lot of verses. In fact, there got to be over 1,500 passages, which was way too many for a slide. Maybe I was engaged in some overkill, I don't know, but it's been a long time since I'd actually studied the Old Testament after years of being a preacher. And so Richard had the idea. He said, you know what? This would make a good book. Pun intended. This would be a good book. I remember reading that email to Annie Laurie. Annie Laurie and I are co-presidents of FFRF. And Annie Laurie said, hell yes, that would be a good book. So one chapter for each of those 19 nasty adjectives. And so as I was working and digging through it, I felt like Nietzsche, who said he needed to put on gloves when he read the Bible. I mean, it was like some of the stuff I didn't realize, even after years of preaching, is that really there? Like Thomas, the Bible, where's Thomas? Doubting Thomas? Thomas the train wreck, I think. The Bible's a train wreck. Some of the stuff I thought, wow, I can't believe it. Did I used to preach from this book? So every one of those things is documented, but I discovered 8 more adjectives that Dawkins missed. Maybe he didn't miss them. Maybe he thought, okay, 19's enough, all right? But so part 1 of the book is called Dawkins Was Right, and it documents every one of those with plenty of examples of bloodthirstiness and misogyny. But then part 2 of the book is Dawkins Was Too Kind. And then I have 8 more there. I have pyromaniacal, angry, merciless, cannibalistic, what's another one? Aborticidal, and curse-hurling, and slave-monger, because of slavery in the Bible. And then, of course, what are people going to say when they see a book like that? What's the first thing a Christian is going to say? What about the New Testament? What about Jesus, right? Yeah, or a rewrite. Yeah, you want to rewrite the Bible? By the way, going through I picked the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, because I think it's pretty popular among scholars, the NRSV, although there's all sorts of English translations. But then I discovered, after I had these 1,500 passages with more than 2,000 verses, the NRSV told me they have a 500-verse limit. Otherwise, they own your book. They have royalties on it. You can use up to 500 verses of the translation royalty-free. So I had to scramble and redo and change to different versions. And I used some of the King James, too. Not because I think it's the greatest translation, but it's kind of familiar. And I learned something interesting. The King James is public domain, but in England, if you're going to publish a book with the King James Version, you need permission from the Queen. Did you know that? You actually need to get permission from the Queen's printer to print the King James, because it was produced by the Crown, right? King James produced it, and it was owned by the nation. So keep that in mind next time you're publishing a book in London. So the last chapter of the book is called What About Jesus? And it's short. It's only 10 pages because it's mainly focusing on Dawkins' sentence. But I show that if you believe Jesus lived and said what he said, whatever, that character that's in the New Testament, whether he was historical or fictional, and as a believer, I took it all as truth. So if you believe that character said, I and the Father are one. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. The Jews asked Jesus, who he was, and he said, before Abraham was, I am. And the Jews didn't call Jesus Father. Jesus was their husband. And the Israelites were the bride. In fact, it was all the sexual imagery in the Old Testament, the bride going fornicating and whoring after strange gods and all that stuff. And the Jews said, well, Abraham was our father. And Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. He was quoting what happened at the burning bush, the very words Jesus was identifying himself with God. So the Jesus of the New Testament, in his own words, was the God of the Old Testament. Wasn't any better. Sometimes you hear arguments that, well, there's a moral arc to Scripture, but way back, things were bad back then, but in the Old Testament, and then the new things got better. And sure, things were more peaceable. Under the Pax Romana, there was less of this genocidal wars among believers going on. And by the way, in the Bible, the word peace rarely means what you and I think it means. Peace in the Bible usually meant pacification. And there are passages in the Old Testament that says, when you attack one of those Canaanite cities, offer it terms of peace. They would use the word shalom. And if it doesn't accede to that, then you shall either kill them or turn them into slaves. And then there will be peace on earth. And the Pax Romana was an imperialistic peace. So through most of the Bible, the word peace is really a term of violence. Peace was a put down, a shut down. Be quiet. Be still and know that I am God. You know what that verse actually means? It means shut up and say uncle. That's what it means. Be still and know that I am God. So Jesus came along, and whenever he quoted Scripture, he quoted the God of the Old Testament, right? In fact, he often quoted it in ways that show that he endorsed it. When he was asked what are the greatest commandments, and he said, you should love the Lord your God with all your heart. He was quoting from Deuteronomy when they were making that covenant before they were to go and invade the land. And Moses, God through Moses told the people, you're about to go into this strange land, which is going to be our love nest, our promised chosen land. We're going to kick out everybody. And you're going to harvest crops that you didn't plant. You're going to live in homes that you didn't build. You're going to go in there and take it over by force. He said, when you do that, don't be tempted by their gods. I'm your lover. I'm your husband. Don't be tempted by them. And then the rest of the covenant goes on to say, here's all these curses that will come on you if you disobey me. What if a modern wedding, the officiant gets up and says, do you promise to love and obey? And the husband says, yes, I take her as my wife. And if she ever looks sideways at another man, I'm going to pull out her hair and spread dog poop on her face, and I'm going to burn her, and I'm going to... Enough, right? That's pretty crazy. This possessiveness of an abusive, controlling husband, which is what the jealous God of the Old Testament really was toward his bride. So Jesus was quoting, and God said, when you get in there, don't be tempted by those other gods in Canaan. You should love the Lord your God with all your heart. It really was a top-down, controlling kind of love. It wasn't like you and I would think of loving mutually horizontal with people. It was this submitting to the alpha male husband who's going to say, you belong to me, you're my property, and I'm your Lord. That's the whole idea. Jesus quoted that. He quoted that verse, which came from really a genocidal passage that God was telling them when you go into the promised land. You should love your neighbor as yourself. The other commandment was, if you look at that, the word neighbor then really referred to your Hebrew neighbor, to your kin. They didn't have much love to neighboring tribes. They didn't have much love for everyone else. He was basically saying what all groups say, love your own, basically. Jews love Jews. Baptists love Baptists. I mean, we love our own, so big deal. Be sure to love your neighbor as yourself. So the Jesus of the New Testament, if there really was a moral arc, if there really was, that God of the Old Testament was, back then things were different and we're moving through history. And you hear that a lot. You hear William Lane Craig and others say, well, the violence of the Old Testament was really, you have to see it in the context of the moral arc aiming toward the death and resurrection of Jesus and the redeeming of the human race. When one of these sweaty Hebrew warriors invaded one of these Canaanite villages and was about to chop off the head of a 3-year-old, did he turn to the parents and say, by the way, you need to be seeing this through the moral arc that's going to culminate someday in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Praise God. This is really a good, merciful thing I'm doing. Would that have made any difference to those people? If there was a moral arc, if the Bible was going to redeem itself, and I kept reading through it thinking, well, maybe in the book of Job I'll find some moral lesson here. There's nothing there. As we heard earlier today, it's just God admitted that Satan, you incited me to destroy him for no reason. That's just admitting to the police, I murdered this innocent family because no reason, the devil made me do it. I mean, that's horrible. That's a hate crime. If there really was going to be a chance for the Bible to redeem itself, the New Testament would have been the place. Jesus could have come along and said, okay, I'm the Messiah. It's a New Testament, and I apologize for my dad. I'm sorry. He was a jerk. He was sexist. He was, he talked about grabbing. In fact, in Jeremiah 13, we see God himself saying to the Israelites, you know the reason why the Babylonians are attacking you? I'm letting that happen to you to punish you because you're looking at other gods. And when the Babylonians come to kill you and when they come to attack your women and when their skirts are lifted up, you know what that phrase meant? What happens during wartime to women? When their skirts are being lifted up, he said, I, the Lord, will lift up your skirts. He's threatening sexual assault of women in the Bible. Jesus could have said, I apologize. He was a sexist. I mean, this is better now. I'm the New Testament. He didn't. He blew his chance to make it into a true moral tale. And he just endorsed what his father said. He said he was his father. So I didn't even need 10 pages on Jesus because he claimed to be and acted and quoted with pride the words of the God of the Old Testament. So there's a whole bunch of stories in there. Job is one of them. How much time do I have? Do I have another? I don't even have a clock here. Oh, 4:10, so I got about 5 minutes, is that right? Or something. So I was in Tucson for the very first book festival for this book, and I was just walking to the booth. They had about 500 exhibitors there. It was pretty great book festival. We walked past the Gideon's booth, and so the Gideons aren't just passively handing out Bibles. They were stepping out into the sidewalk. Here's the best-selling book of all history. You need to read it. And I said, well, we're headed to the atheist booth. He said, oh, atheist? Well, I bet we could have an interesting conversation. I said, I bet we could. So I came back about an hour or two later to get some ice cream, and I walked past their booth, and here they come out again. So they're sticking the Bible in everybody's face. You need to read this, the best-selling book in all history. And I said, oh, really? It's the best-selling book, but I don't think anyone reads it. Have you read the whole Bible? And they said, yes, we have. There was these two guys, white guy and a black guy, big guy like Rosie Greer, big guy. And I said, oh, you've read the Bible? And they said, yes, we have. It's the best-selling moral book of all history. And I said, oh, well, then maybe you can explain to me, do you think Pinchas was a good man? And he looked at me, and I said, Pinchas, there's a whole chapter in Numbers 25. There's a whole chapter about Pinchas. Do you think he was a good man? And he says, well, you never heard that? I thought you read the Bible. And I asked the other guy, do you think Pinchas? And they said, well, I said, let me ask you a question. And I said, well, I'm asking you a question. You know how they do that? Instead of answering, they want to ask me another question. And so I explained the story of Pinchas. The Israelites were told not to mix with the evil, wicked Midianites. The Midianites also claimed ancestry through Abraham, but they were living south of the border, basically south of the Israelites. And the Midianites were evil. And do you know why they were evil? Most of the time in the Bible, almost every single time, with a couple of exceptions, the words wicked and evil have nothing to do with behavior and moral actions. Do you know what wicked and evil is? Worshiping another god, worshiping idols, not loving the abusive, controlling husband. That's wicked. And that's like, you wicked slut, you're looking at another man. That's what wickedness meant in the Old Testament. God even said, my name is jealous in Exodus 34. He tells us his name is jealous. There were a lot of names for God in the Old Testament, but he told us right there in the Ten Commandments, the only version that's called the Ten Commandments in Exodus 34. So the Midianites were evil and wicked people. Just like Saul was considered wicked and he had to be deposed because he did not obey God 100%. And David came along, who was a man after God's own heart, and he was considered righteous because he did complete the total genocide that Saul would not complete. So God was mad. You Israelites shouldn't be mixing. What happens with kissing cousins across the border? I mean, what happens in any culture, right? So there was a plague, and then there was a man named Zimri who brought a woman named Cosby into his tent, a Midianite, an Israelite and a Midianite, right in front of everybody. He defied that order of Moses, and he fell in love and brought her in. And so Pinchas was a priest. He was the grandson of Aaron, the high priest Aaron. Pinchas was so outraged that Cosby and Zimri would do this evil miscegenation, this mixed marriage between cultures, that he went into their tent with a sword and stabbed them both and killed them. What if somebody did that today? What do you think would happen to them? If some righteous preacher were to get up and say, oh, you're violating, you should not have mixed marriages, and went in and killed them, that would be a hate crime of the highest order, right? What happened to, murder. What happened to Phinehas in the Bible? Do you know? Some translations say Phinehas, P-H, and some say Phinehas. Do you know the story? There's a whole chapter about it. How come people don't know this story, right? I think it's like what Thomas said earlier. People don't read it. It's kind of like when you're installing a new app on your device or signing on to the wireless. The terms and conditions, right? Do you read them? Do you just scroll down and hit accept? And, I think that's what most believers do. Phinehas was rewarded by God for keeping the nation pure. And he was rewarded with a perpetual priesthood because he did something righteous and good. And I asked these guys, these Gideon guys, so do you think Phinehas was a good man? And they looked at me and said, let me ask you a question. I said, well, answer my question. Was he a good man or not? God said he was. Was it good to kill a mixed-race couple just because God didn't want? They wouldn't answer the question. They couldn't face the question. They had never even thought about the question. So there's a whole bunch of other stories like that I had forgotten about. Maybe I read them when I was a preacher, but I don't remember a story. Yeah, I never heard that story from the pulpit, I don't think. Maybe some churches do. The story about Korah, K-O-R-A-H. Korah did something that Martin Luther did. In fact, I think most Protestants should be admiring Korah. Should be admiring Korah. When the Israelites were out in the wilderness, they had this sort of military top-down control. Moses and Aaron were coming, and God wasn't talking to the people. Moses and Aaron were saying, God spoke to us, and God told us to tell you, right? It was like this other. And so Korah went up to Moses, and this is what Martin Luther did with the Pope. Why do we need these intermediaries? Why can't God just talk right to us people? And Korah said that to Moses. Why is God talking through you two guys? Why can't God talk to the people, his own people? If he's our husband, right? Can't we? And so what do you think Moses did? Do you think Moses, I would have thought maybe the writers would say, well, we're in a kind of tough military time now. We're about to invade and conquer this promised land. And so we need to have stricter measures of control and government for a while. But when we get back settled into our little love nest over there, then we'll relax. I would have thought something like that, like an explanation. Is that what Moses did? What happened next would require the highest Hollywood special effects you can imagine. The earth opened, and Korah and his 250 followers fell into the earth and then slammed on them. There. That was the authority. You don't dare question the authority of the Pope or the Vatican or the highest person who tells you that God is telling them. That was the top-down authority within the Bible. So then, how smart were these people? The next day, the other Israelites went to Moses and said, that seemed kind of heavy-handed. Do you wag a finger at this maniac who just killed a bunch of people and say that? So Moses got angry again, and the plague killed, I forget the number, 24,000. There was a big number of people that were killed because of that. And then Aaron had to burn some smoke incense to please God stop killing all of our people. Shouldn't we be saving our people for the war that's coming when we invade the Promised Land? So anyway, the morality of the Old Testament God is at minimum questionable, I would say. I only have a few copies left. Some of you bought them before. Do I have time for one song, or are we out of time here? Okay. The farmers pray for precipitation, and then they say, "In God we trust." Then along comes a drought and dries their crops out and turns their prayers into dust. The next time they need some assistance, they should take the advice of Mark Twain, who said, "It's better to check the weather report before you pray for rain. Nothing fails like prayer. Nothing fails like prayer. Use your mind and you will find that nothing fails like prayer." You reach the final week of the school year, but you haven't studied your best. So you stay up and cram for the final exam and pray for God's help on the test. You answer the questions with assurance, that the Lord will help you sail through. When the results are returned, what have you learned? God's no smarter than you. Nothing fails like prayer. Nothing fails like prayer. Use your mind and you will find that nothing fails like prayer. You ask a supernatural power for sunshine on your wedding day. Then along comes a thunder shower and washes your prayers away. When things go right, you praise the Almighty and you give thanks in Jesus' name. But when things go wrong, you change your song and God never gets the blame. Nothing fails like prayer. Nothing fails like prayer. Use your mind and you will find that nothing fails like prayer. How many centuries will it take us before we realize there are no magic forces in nature, no watchful eyes in the skies? As Robert Ingersoll said, a single plow is much more effective than 100 prayers a day. The hands that help are better far than lips that pray. Nothing fails like prayer. Nothing fails like prayer. Use your mind and you will find that nothing fails like prayer.
If you have questions for Dan, we'd ask you to please stand by the microphone there so he can hear you. Anybody want to ask questions? There you go, sir.
Stupid question, but arcs go up and then they come down.
Yeah, you're right, arcs go up and come down. But you know, Martin Luther King Jr. and others have quoted that thing about the moral arc of history, that it started out low and it is improving. So that's kind of the argument you hear from some Christian apologists, that the Old Testament was lower back then, but that we are improving toward Jesus.
Hi, could you please sing No Gods, No Masters?
Oh, No Gods, No Masters. I don't know if I can remember the whole tune. It's a lot of words. It's a song about Margaret Sanger that's on one of our albums. And I haven't done it for a long time, so you'll have to buy the album. But the phrase, no gods, no masters, was Margaret Sanger's motto. When she had her Woman's Rebel, her periodical called The Woman's Rebel, she worked for birth control and women's rights, and she was fighting the church. She was an outspoken atheist who improved this world. Her motto was, no gods, no masters. And for a woman to say that, that means a lot more, doesn't it? You know, no male, no authority, no patriarchy, no top-down authority. We all live our own lives bottom up. Yeah.
What, in your opinion, is the nastiest part of the Bible, or the nastiest verse?
What's the nastiest verse?
Nastiest.
Well, the one I quoted in Jeremiah 13, where God said, I myself will lift up your skirts, and there's others. Beware the daughters of Zion, they walk with tinkling feet. The Lord will smite their crown with the scab and will discover their secret parts. The Lord's going to discover their secret parts, and which is sexual assault. That word in the Hebrew is poth, P-O-T-H, which meant a hinged opening. So what part of a woman is a hinged opening that the Lord of the Old Testament is going to discover? I mean, that's pretty gross. That's pretty nasty. Psalm 137:9, of course, you all know that one, where the Babylonians were threatened, and the psalmist says, happy shall be he who takes and dashes thy little ones against the stones. It didn't say during wartime there might be some regrettable collateral damage that happens sometimes. It said you should be happy. Some translations say blessed. Blessed or happy shall you be to take their little innocent babies and throw them against the stones. That's pretty gross. There's more, though, but that's pretty gross. Yeah.
Hi. It seems to me the problems you're talking about, and I agree completely, they stem from the way we look at the Bible in the modern world. We look at it this whole thing. We're trying to look at it as a complete narrative that really is all one long story. But of course it's not. And do you know of, or did you research at all, people who have taken some of these stories and said, what were they really trying to say at that time, whenever, 3,000 years ago? What were they trying to say to their people? What was the political statement? What was the moral world at that point? What were they trying to say?
Yeah, you hear that all the time.
Do you know about that?
Exegesis and interpretation and trying to find some way to... but of course, should we not look at those actions by modern moral standards and at least say that's bad? Maybe they didn't think it was bad back then, but can't we at least morally judge those actions? And maybe they didn't know any better, but you could say that about a lot of phases of human history. Now we've learned better.
I'm not trying to forgive what Catholics are currently doing. I don't want to get confused with that. But
yeah. So, the Gideon Bible that's in the drawer of the hotel room doesn't come accompanied with a bevy of experts and scholars there to explain to you what it really, really means. It's supposed to be, like Tom said earlier today, it should be God's word that is accessible to all of us, just like Korah with Moses. Why do we need these intermediate? If God, in other words, if you need an expert to understand it, God blew it. He did a poor job of writing the book.
A couple of years ago, I debated a Christian in a private discussion. He's from Tennessee. He's a science teacher. And I learned then that, excuse me, closer? Sounded loud to me. I learned that in Tennessee, teaching creationism in school is legal. Is that correct? Do you know?
No, it's not legal, but they're trying to pass laws to allow some watering down of it, basically.
So I just didn't
watering
know.
down of evolution.
I just didn't. Maybe it was just in his county that I checked out, but I didn't know if the Freedom from Religion Foundation has tried to make an inroad into affecting
Well,
that.
if you can find that county, we'll send them a nice letter.
I'll do that.
By the way, say hi to the Freedom from Religion Foundation. This is being streamed, right? And I know some of them are watching right now. Some of our busy attorneys are taking a break. So hi, now get back to work.
This is not so much a question as it is a suggestion. Next time the Gideons tell you the Bible is the best-selling book, it's like, yes, you're selling it, but nobody's buying. That's why you're giving it away.
Yeah, he's giving it away. Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Dan Barker, ladies and gentlemen. And now we'll take a break and rejoin at 6 o'clock for the Buzz Belief. Enjoy yourself and relax because it's going to get real good.
Why not?
Because I think everybody knows that it's a cartoon in essence.
So, what is it about these comic book characters or superheroes that puts them in that category for you?
Abilities that are way beyond what normal, average human can, realistically do. But in comic books, they just take that ability and they just multiply it so many times. I think the vast majority of people already know that the characters aren't real, just from the history. They've been around for so long that I think people are aware that the characters just are pretend.
But what if everybody told you your whole life that they were real? Could you still tell the difference?
A reading from the book of Nolan's. He was the hero Gotham deserved, but not the one it needed right then. And so he was hunted, because he could take it. He is not our hero. He's a silent guardian, a watchful protector, a dark knight. The word of Gordon. Na 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 na. Batman, Batman, Batman.